Okay, we talked about the tech. Let's talk about games, because, you know, it is the PlayStation 4, and you're probably here because you're really into games. We saw quite a few, the first of which was a surprise to me. Mark Cerny, who is clearly behind the architecture of the PlayStation 4, and who once upon a time made Marble Madness, one of my favorite arcade games ever, is also working on a title. It looks somewhat modest, but really quite interesting. It's called Knack, and you play, I guess, a little dude robot thing. I don't know. Anyway, I assume his name is Knack, and it looks like, similar to Katamari Damacy, that you kind of absorb various things in the environment that changes your size, I assume changes your powers. It has a very stylized look, and when they showed the trailer, and this is interesting because I saw this with a lot of the non-real-time demos that we saw here at the event, it was unclear if what we were looking at was in-game rendered images or if it was sort of a pre-rendered cutscene. It's because clearly these images could be rendered by the PS4, and it's just very hard to tell. When it was clear that you were looking at the actual game is when they brought it out being streamed onto the PlayStation Vita, and I thought it looked much better there than it did in the trailer. It had animations that reminded me of what Aardman does with Wallace and Gromit, almost like sort of a stop motion. I know that could be maybe because it's not fully optimized, but I kind of liked it the way it was. But let's get to the other games. I assume there's a new saying that you can't have a new PlayStation announced without showing something from a Killzone game. So this, what they showed us was Killzone Shadowfall. Visually, very impressive. Though to be fair, you should always be impressed. That's what Guerrilla does very, very well. These incredibly crisp and clean graphics. What was quite distinct from the other Killzone games, which had always been criticized for their very dour palette, this looked like just a wash in color. There was lights. It seemed to be taking place on a world that wasn't in a state of destruction. Obviously, it's still a shooter. I have to say, as you can see in the video, there's a character who suddenly emerges right before the action starts. I thought it was Altair or Ezio. It looked like Assassin's Creed had suddenly stepped into my Killzone game. Apparently, no, this is just some kind of assassin disguise that's in the Killzone game. Someone had described somewhere on Twitter that it was like Killzone suddenly had invaded a Ratchet & Clank game, and it was really nice to see all those colors and all those images. The one thing I would say is, as impressive as it was technically, there was nothing I was seeing in the game outside of the technical that looked like it was taking advantage of some of the more interesting aspects of what the PlayStation 4 apparently can do. And this is something that played quite a few of the game demos and the game trailers that we saw throughout this presentation. We did see a racing game, though not that one from Polyphony that goes Gran Turismo and seems to never come out. This is from Evolution Studios, which is made up of some former members from Criterion, and it's a game called Drive Club. What seems to be the catch here is an almost absurd fetishistic attention to detail. They were mentioning how the fibers in the seats, that they've planned them out which way they actually brush. So when you sit on it and you make them go in the opposite direction, you'll see that visual effect, because nothing defines driving like fibers in a chair. No, I joke a little bit. It is also very much from a first-person point of view and not the traditional cockpit view that you get in a lot of racing games out there. They really didn't show much of it. It looked visually very pretty. Yeah, racing game at the launch of the PlayStation, so I guess maybe they don't have to have a Ridge Racer this time. Following that, we saw what was also not a demo, but was an announcement that actually made me feel very good. There's another Infamous game. It's called Second Son. It looked like a very cool idea. Apparently, there's now other people with powers. There's no Cole McGrath to be found, but you got the sense that there's other people with powers, some good, some bad. It's a nice way, I think, to help expand what I think is a very fun mythology inside of the Infamous series. I've always admired Sucker Punch back when they were doing the Sly Cooper. Really like the first Infamous game. I am very intrigued to see what they can do, not just with the new power, but especially with the sharing aspect, because we saw a touch of that with Infamous 2, but I wouldn't say it necessarily was realized to its full potential. Now, that was the end of the first-party titles that we got from Sony, and then we started to see people come on from outside, from the third parties. This is a very important thing because Sony became quite notorious for making life quite difficult for third-party developers because of the architecture of the PS3 was so challenging. First out was the game that everyone kind of knew was a next-gen game, and that's Watch Dogs. This wasn't sort of as exciting or as narrative-based as the demo that we saw at the Ubisoft press conference back at E3, but it was nonetheless very impressive. It was a sunny day, so apparently there is sun in this rather obnoxious world where everyone's connected and there's someone running around exploiting it. And it showed what I think could very well be just kind of a side quest where you go around and you can steal the information from various residents and people in the city. You can just learn about who they are. There's one man who was, I believe, a right-wing tobacco lobbyist, and he broke into he got his ID and then walked right over to an ATM and pulled out money from that guy's account. That was immediately followed by him following another woman who he was tipped off could be in danger, and she had a restraining order against a former boyfriend, and the boyfriend confronts her with a gun, and off our hero goes, chasing him down the street. It seemed to be an interesting, very dynamic aspect of the game. It was a far more narrow piece of game than what we saw back at E3, and I think it doesn't do anything to kind of assuage the concerns that the game could be very, very scripted. But if it is as dynamic as they are presenting it, this could be one of the most impressive games I've seen in a very long time. They also, and this is probably one of the best things I saw here at this presentation, are really willing to embrace indie games and not creating a massive barrier of entry to get them onto the PlayStation Network. The big challenge still with Sony is getting people to buy these games and to experience these games. But this was really highlighted by bringing out Jonathan Blow, the creator of Braid, really kind of the reigning king supreme of the indie game movement. His new game, Witness, which is an open world puzzle game that he says has 25 hours worth of content in it, is now only going to be on the PlayStation 4. It's really cool that the game is available. Obviously, he put this deal together, but I think of greater note is the philosophical message that's being said about where Sony stands, obviously in the wake of the success of a game like Journey, with these small, experimental, and independent games. We did see some concepts from David Cage, the man behind Heavy Rain, who yet again seemed to come out. And yeah, I wouldn't say he was scolding the audience this time, but he does have his very strong opinions about other games being made out there. We saw some absolutely amazing technology of what he had done with sort of faces, with the translucency of skin. It was all very impressive. He also said that the answer to make things more emotional in games is Polygon, followed by one of my favorite studios out there, Media Molecule, who said that polygons were all the problem, and they showed a very, very fun tech demo. I would love to see how this can be turned into a game using, believe it or not, the Move controller. The Move controller, somehow they use it to kind of sculpt clay, to both add and remove more clay to make these objects, and then show these objects animated yet again with a Move controller. It was for people, it was kind of a music scene. I've always thought one of the greatest potentials inside of Little Big Planet is less just building game levels than to allow people who really understand that tool set to make stories, to make small films, because the Sackboy characters are just so emotive and you don't have to give them voice. This seems to be like a step that gets closer and closer in that direction. I already believe that I will be fully incompetent to do anything of any value with it, but I would love to see them really refine this and put it into the hands of players who are far more adept than I. In the parade of third parties, Capcom came on, and interestingly enough, Yoshinori Ono, the man who's responsible for the Street Fighter franchise and definitely responsible for the revitalization of fighting games with Street Fighter 4, came out on stage, but not to introduce a fighting game. It was to introduce kind of new engine tech in a code-named game called Deep Down, and everyone was kind of making jokes about the name of the engine, which I can't even remember the proper name of, but everyone thought it was kind of like Panty Raid. Nonetheless, it was a very interesting looking demo. It was very, very beautiful to look at. It was not real time. There was no one demoing it right there. I have to actually say, if there's one thing I was slightly skeptical of, it was that. It was very, very impressive to see, almost to the point that I would question how something could look that good on a system that really is still not released yet. I would love to see more about it. It was a dragon, it was a sword fighting game. It actually looked very Western in terms of its design. Does it become Dragon's Dogma? It had a knight. It had a dragon. At the very end, you realize that it has some social aspect because apparently Blanca was playing the game. What it is it Dragon Dogma 2? I don't know, but at the end of the day, this is one that I really need to see more on because it's making some pretty huge promises that I want to see delivered. That was followed by probably, I think, the least useful contribution in this evening, and that was from Square showing what they hope to have in a game somewhere down the line. It was a big, massive CG cutscene that looks as beautiful as all of their other CG cutscenes that wasn't indicative of a game, and they wouldn't say it was a game, and then by saying that this is what they hope to make their games look like really shows that they probably don't have anything that looks like this just yet. it is just showing that Square sometimes can get so tone deaf about what people want to see and how they want to be experiencing their games, that by showing yet another beautiful cutscene, it's not really serving the sense that the PlayStation 4 can do anything any more impressive than what they've been doing in the years past. Perhaps the moment that was the most surprising, and you could feel this room getting a little bit more like what's about to happen, is when, boom, Blizzard has a game coming to the PlayStation 4. Could it be Titan? No, it couldn't be. It's actually Diablo 3. Yeah, not the most exciting. The game's been out. Most everyone I know has already played it. It sold, what, 12 million copies? But it does allow for same couch co-op. That is the one reason I could see wanting to bring it onto a console. Why they had to sort of incorporate into it, I wasn't so sure at the time, and then it all made sense, because yet another Activision Blizzard game was brought out to the stage by CEO of Activision, Eric Hirshberg, and yes, it was Destiny, the game that I was told about up in Seattle last week, and we were kind of told about it again, albeit far more briefly. There was a little bit more in-game footage. I wouldn't say there was a substantive amount, and no one clip probably went longer than 12 seconds. It's still a game that seems to be a lot of promises that have nothing demonstrative to show that those are being realized, but it was nice to know that this is for next-gen consoles, as it so clearly was, and I have every expectation it'll be on the new Xbox console as well. So those are the games that they showed. Some of them were very surprising, very exciting about where the ideas might go, but I also felt that it was a little bit on the safe side. Also by not showing enough real-time demos, and when they did, seeing games that felt very familiar, albeit incredibly beautiful. I know we're going to see more at E3. Hopefully we'll keep seeing more down the line, but we've only gotten a taste of something that really shows that game design is going to be matching the technical design that we're going to be seeing very, very shortly.